The RCMP Commissioner and the Trudeau government put politics over procedure. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The Halifax Examiner put out an amazing piece titled "The RCMP Commissioner, Brenda Lucki, Tried to Jeopardize Mass Murder Investigation to Advance Trudeau's Gun Control Efforts." This piece is astounding, really. So, this RCMP Commissioner, Brenda Lucki, she quote-unquote made a promise to Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and the Prime Minister's office, so Trudeau's people, to leverage the mass murder that occurred between April 18th and 19th, 2020 to get a gun control law passed. And how did she expect to do that? By leaking things early to the media to create public hysteria, to do away with proper procedure so that they could drum up a political agenda. This is the complete opposite of what high-ranking public servants should be doing. They should be looking out for the interest of neutrality, dispassionate thinking, not being a lackey for the government. Politicians always have an agenda, and they're going to be thinking primarily about what's going to appease their voter base and how can they leverage that to win the upcoming election, because that's how they remain employed. A public servant has a much more concrete time frame. They're not thinking in 4-year cycles. They're not thinking about what's going to appease this pocket that's going to vote for you, or at least they shouldn't be. And when you mingle these two things, corruption is inevitable. The average citizen may be the one who is voting for the politicians, but once the politicians are in power, the stopgap between them and ludicrous decisions are those high-ranking public servants. And if they're anything like Lucki, then we're in a strange situation. So, back to the article. A week after that mass murder spree, Lucki pressured RCMP in Nova Scotia to release details of the weapons used by the killer. But RCMP commanders in Nova Scotia refused to release such details, saying it would threaten their investigation into the murders. Making confidential information like that public right away could do things to deter where their investigation is heading. People became very uncomfortable because they were concerned about the extent to which politics threatened to interfere with a cross-border police investigation into how the killer managed to obtain and smuggle into Canada 4 illegal guns used to commit those murders. Now, there's an interesting piece of information there. It was a cross-border incident, so intertwining this with Trudeau's domestic gun policy is, of course, just a game of politics. The RCMP commanders realized this, and they also saw the detriment to being too quick with the information. Police procedures exist for a reason: to preserve the integrity of the investigation and to do things like minimize the risk of interference and potentially suspects becoming more evasive. Darren Campbell, a senior member of the RCMP, briefed journalists at a news conference after the murders, and he did not reveal any compromising information as logic would dictate, as they said they would not. Now, after that meeting, it came out that the commissioner was upset. It's reported that she did not raise her voice in that meeting, but her choice of words was indicative of her overall dissatisfaction with their work, the RCMP employees. The commissioner accused them, and in particular Darren Campbell, of disrespecting her by not following her instructions to release the information. Now, Darren states that, quote-unquote, "However, I said we couldn't do that because it would jeopardize the ongoing efforts to advance the U.S. side of the case as well as the Canadian components of the investigation. Those are facts, and I stand by them." So I'm glad this public servant actually had a spine to stand up to authority who was trying to force something to happen. Something that the commissioner can learn from. Now, this is interesting. The commissioner just reveals her hand here, and she says that she had promised the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office at the RCMP would release the information. Well, it's a shame that you did that. Your promise is not a binding agreement, and you don't speak for all the commanders and what's best for the institution. Now, as the commissioner, you should do that, but clearly here politics was interfering with what was ultimately the goal of the unit, which was to solve the crime, to figure out how things went down. Now, to release this info, the timing would be perfect, because around that time, as we talked about, Trudeau's gun control objectives were spelled out in an order issued to Council. And then Bill C-21, I believe, came out. So, of course, the Prime Minister's office is going to tell you to leak this information, to stir up the media, to cause some hysteria so that the public can align with the things coming out of Trudeau's mouth. But the more you look into it, the more things become interesting. We realize that it was a cross-border gun incident. Guns coming across from America into Canada, which is actually a major problem. Is Trudeau tackling that? No, he's not. But they wanted to frame the tragedy to fit the narrative. Now there's a part 2 here, so obviously after that mishap, well, at least a mishap in the eyes of the commissioner, I guess she decided not to bother with going through the employees anymore, and she herself agreed to a number of one-on-one interviews with reporters, like CBC News, CTV, the Canadian Press, and so on. And she went on these shows and began to release information like the number of people who died. She went on record saying that 17 people were confirmed dead. Now, this caused a lot of confusion. The public and the press corps were both alarmed because the numbers weren't exact and they kept fluctuating. The final count ended up being 22. So here you have the commissioner saying 17. You have rumors that it was less or more. And the director of strategic communications at the RCMP says that the commissioner released a body count that we, communications, didn't even have. These internal units responsible for dealing with the press and giving that info were confused. They were caught off guard. They were wondering why the commissioner was out here saying things that weren't confirmed. Well, at the time it wasn't clear, but now it's very obvious. That same director of strategic communications now says that she went out and did that because of political pressure. That is 100% Minister Blair and the Prime Minister Trudeau. And she said that we have a commissioner that does not push back on these pressures, which is true. That's exactly the case, and that's the problem. Running around making the RCMP look disorganized like you don't know what you're doing, breaking procedure, putting out numbers that haven't even been vetted and confirmed, just because Trudeau wants you to cause a stir. Now, the article got a hold of an email that director of communications sent to the commissioner, and it's quite interesting. The email goes, "Can I make a request that we stop changing the number of victims? Please allow us to lead the release of information. It looks fragmented and inconsistent. I spoke with the commanding officer tonight, and we will be updating this tomorrow. We knew at the time of the press event it was more than 10 victims, but that is what we came to ground on for the event. That is our plan tomorrow. To update as our members continue to do their jobs and discover more crime scenes and bodies. The change in number are causing our phones to ring off the hook." So, telling the commissioner to get in line, basically, and I found that to be quite interesting. It's clear that notions like the truth, evidence, facts, and getting to the ground reality of the matter were not the top priority for the commissioner. The top priority was getting the media and further the public to become stirred up with frenzy, with fear, so the government could more easily pass their agenda. And that's worrisome. It's possible that this commissioner was simply a yes-man and was willing to do whatever the head honchos wanted her to do, even if it meant going against what your internal team knew was best. But indications are here that the commissioner actually believed in the gun control bill herself. That she was reportedly communicating with staff, telling them that we need to get this done because we need that bill to pass. So once again, mixing politics with public service, but even moving beyond that. It's interesting because this line of thinking comes back to that saying, we have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. In her mind, who cares if we have to sacrifice the integrity of the investigation? Who cares if we have to say numbers that may or may not be accurate? Maybe I have to fluff them up a little bit to get people extra excited. Maybe we have to lie, smudge the truth a little bit, do a couple things that are unethical, but we get this outcome that we want. Even though we're not convincing the public through rationality and debate and fact, we can leverage their emotions to pass the bill that I think will produce a good outcome. That's what she was thinking. Anyone who examines that situation can quickly identify the problem with it. It's that the public good is subjective. You can have another commissioner with another prime minister who is warping reality, mixing politics with public service and institutions to push an agenda that she may think is bad. Is that how we should be operating? No, clearly not. This is a path to corruption. It's a path to prime ministers getting their fingers in things that they shouldn't, because obviously they're going to abuse things to fit their political discourse, to fit their political goals and aims and aspirations. There's a reason why the Bank of Canada is separate from the government. There's a reason why the RCMP has a separate chain of command that doesn't have Trudeau as the head of it. Going down this path puts you in a position like we see in Russia and China, where public servants are just yes men. They're agenda pushers. They're not allowed to speak up and do what's right or what's in the best interest of the public at large because they're afraid. Because the paradigm has been established where the government is calling all the shots, where there are some instances where it's just not appropriate to do so. The commissioner definitely deserves to be called out for this, but even further, look at the top. More shady, ridiculous behavior from Trudeau and his office and his ministers. How much evidence do we need to confirm that Trudeau really is just incompetent, silly, and likes to abuse powers? The Emergencies Act. Think back to SNC Lavalin and what he did to Jody Raybould. The lack of transparency that we're seeing with various censorship bills and trying to hold closed debates about them. When is the public going to hold him to account? That's my fundamental question after reviewing this article. Things definitely have to be exposed, and I'm glad that this small-time paper or press organization wrote this article. And I'm amazed by how little attention it's picked up in national media. So kudos to the Halifax Examiner for putting together this scathing report, this very comprehensive documentation of what went down here, and I do have question marks as to why other organizations are not following suit. I do have questions as to why Trudeau seems like he's going to escape again from yet another incident that would tank most other politicians. If I had to speculate, perhaps it's because there are other things on people's minds right now, like cost of living, inflation, unemployment, and whatnot. So I can only hope that by talking about it here, we get more attention to really what is a national scandal. Now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. They'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.